All right, guys, we are live, and today is our last day in Spin Month. So, probably a little bit of spin content next month, but not quite as much as this focused one of February. And today's guest, who will be playing live for us, is a multiple time returning guest. And last time he played a whole crazy mix of games. He played PLO, MTTs, MTT and he crushes spins as well. So please welcome my friend Honigman38.
Hi, Colin. Hi, guys. Thanks for inviting me again to this. I'm really happy to play some spins with you.
Okay, awesome. So I'm going to move to your table. Right now, people can see this, but you've got up a 5100 PLO table. I don't know
Yeah,
if
I
you're
thought
playing there,
about
but that's high stakes, man.
yeah, I thought about jumping in, but maybe we'll skip this and play some spins. Yeah, I think we'll just start out with playing sevens. I think that's fine for now, and then maybe we'll switch later to 15s or so. So let me just pull one up and see how people play.
Great. Go ahead and do that. And one of the themes, Poker Strategy publishes the themes of these spin coachings, and they have it also as a general spin Q&A. And so if you guys have any questions on spins for Honigman, for me, anything, go ahead and put them in. Um, do you want to make this table, by the way, slightly larger?
Oh yeah, sure.
Drag it down to the left a little bit.
Does
And
that work for you?
now slightly more to the right. So I have this fixed space that I already had for. Yeah, great. Okay, perfect.
That's better. Okay.
Do you think that pre-flop is close? I mean, if I folded 9 for a suited there, would you call me a nit?
Well, I think it depends a lot on whether the button open limps, which he did in this. So
No, I
then
mean,
we get,
given that he limped.
given that he limped, yeah, I think it's a pretty standard limp there. We get 5-1 immediate odds on a suited hand. I would fold this offsuit, but I think suited we're good to just call here, as
Okay.
we see how people play actually in this hand. So
Yeah, always some. It seems like in like half of spins, it gets heads up in the first hand.
yeah, that's also a lot more true for lower stakes, because usually the lower the stakes, the more happy people are to gamble. Um, yeah, that happens a lot.
Yeah.
Here, pretty standard open, I think, with ace five suited. We get min donked into on the ace 10 deuce board. I think raising has its merits, but I decided to flat, and now we get bombed into on the turn. Flush comes in, so that's a bit annoying, but I don't think we are ever going to fold this, especially now that if he does have an ace, we split a lot. So he's basically repping a flush or air, so I think we go ahead and call and get shown 10-4,
Nice,
which
nice.
is really weird.
So we're calling the river pretty much any non-spade.
Yeah, exactly. I
Oh,
think
sweet.
here he will be stabbing a lot once he limbed, and he does. I think check raising is fine, but as he seemed to be really aggressive, potting on the turn with like second pair in the hand before, I think let's just check calling and let him do the betting is better. On the turn, when there are a couple draws to be had, we could opt for check raise. However, as he's been bombing all the way, I think just check call and then probably check shove the river if it's not a 3 or 4, basically. Now this makes things a lot easier.
Yeah, this is
And
not such a bad river. Let's see if he
nah,
spews it off here.
pretty sure that he does, and he indeed does. So
Yeah, so
yeah,
you explored into the max. I mean, obviously he was bluffing if he folds, getting such great odds at the end. So definitely max exploitation based on what and also it's you haven't seen a lot of hands. You're very quick to look at how to exploit a guy like that. When some people would say, "Hey, I need 100 hands," and you notice after a couple of hands how the guy's playing, and you make educated guesses, and you look to exploit that, which is really cool.
well, yeah, I think you just have to work with the information you got. Obviously, you don't have a lot of stats on him. I've, as my HUD says, I have 4 hands on him, so he's basically a random. However, the way he played the hands before, the first one with the queen eight, where he just put a lot of money in the pot with an offsuit queen and then kept barreling with second pair, made me think that he doesn't really have such a clue and be betting a lot with mediocre hands, bluffs, rather than strong value hands, just because from what I saw so far. So that's what made me play the hands. I played them. not check raising with two pair and just stationing down with ace high with the top pair with ace yeah, on the ace 10 deuce board. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's perfect. And that's a general thing. People often ask, well, how do I play against a maniac or someone who is clearly very aggressive? And a lot of the time, you just let them do their thing. You know, if they're never going to stop betting, then when you actually have some kind of hand that you're willing to bring to showdown, you just let them bet, and that's how you take advantage of them. We have a couple of questions in the chat, but I'm going to get to one of mine first, because why not, right? I'm the one hosting this.
Sure.
If I want to ask you something, I'm damn well going to ask you. So the question is going back to this 9-4 suited hand, and I know pre-flop ranges, that's not like everything to it, but I'm just curious, are you completing any two suited cards when the button limps and you're the small blind at 10-20?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. I don't really think that there's any hand I wouldn't complete just because we get such great odds, and it's whoops, it's usually fine, I think, to just complete those hands. Yeah, I wouldn't fold one.
So you probably have a folding range of like bottom 20 to 30%.
I guess I guess that's probably what it comes down to. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting because I'm obviously I'm completing a lot, but not quite that wide. So that's interesting. Shifty, yes. This particular coaching will be all spins, and next week will not be a spin coaching. Red Heater has a question. He says, so we had that King Deuce hand earlier where you flop two pair. He says, are we worried about getting outdrawn? For example, if the board pairs, we will likely end up behind to another king.
Well, yeah, that is possible. I agree that this is something to consider. However, the way the villain played his hands before, he was so aggressive that better kings are such a relatively small part of his range, especially when I also have a king, that I don't really think that that's something to make me switch my decision to actually folding this hand anywhere. Just because he's been spewing so hard that it's really tough for him to have a better hand. And he's just going to be betting so often with weaker hands that we cannot really consider folding this against him the way he's been playing.
I agree with that. And I want to add in one thing also, which is that a lot of playing hands is a balancing act. So, for example, if you flop top set against a maniac, and there's, some random possible straight out there, that doesn't mean that you should just jam the flop because of the fact that he might outdraw you. So, different lines have different pros and cons, and we just have to think what is going to be the best approach against our given opponent, even though sometimes that hand is not going to work out because we get outdrawn or whatever.
Yeah, for sure, I agree with this. And the question that this really comes down to is how to deal with variance, basically, because that's just all it is. If we get outdrawn here, it's just really bad luck. But that doesn't mean that we should play the hand any differently, and that's the wrong way to play this hand. Just to be careful, because we could get outdrawn. Obviously, we can, but it's very unlikely, and it's more likely that villains are bluffing or doing some weird stuff. So it's very easy to just check call down.
Perfect.
Here, I think we have a pretty easy shove there with like 7 big blinds and ace 4 run into ace queen. That's unfortunate, but
agree with that for sure. Surim has a question. He asks, I think this question is referring to the hand where you open shove queen jack offsuit heads up for 11 blinds. Surim, if that's not the hand you're referring to, let us know. He writes, is that all in with queen jack offsuit good? Most of the times I do that, I get dominated by an ace or a king.
Well, I think that's a mathematical question, and that's something you can very easily look up at in various charts. And you will find that queen jack at 11 big blinds is pretty much the nuts, and you can definitely profitable shove this against anyone. So that's not really something to worry about. If he shows up with like ace x or king x, It's unfortunate, however, being dominated is also very different from getting it in against like ace deuce offsuit or something. So definitely a very standard shove.
Yeah, and in fact, so you say it's a math problem, which is totally true, but Queen Jack offsuit is strong enough that you, not saying that you would want to do this, but you could turn your hand face up when you shove, and you would still show a profit, even
Yeah.
if he played perfectly against you. It's tough to get dealt a hand in heads up, basically.
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
Um,
I think against this player, it might also be correct because he's been so aggressive to actually just min raise and call it off because he's been so aggressive that he might even just jam worse and stuff that we are actually doing pretty good against. That's just something that you should maybe do some calculations off the tables to just see what kind of range people are jamming there and what's better to just open jam or just min raise and call it off. That really
definitely,
depends.
definitely.
But definitely, the point is just that there are a lot of people where it's more profitable to just min raise and call it off than to open jam for 11 big blinds.
Okay.
And
I'm
there are
good.
other ones where limping also makes sense.
Yeah, I know limping is definitely something I want us to talk about more. But first, I'm going to make kind of a weird request of you, which is these eye avatars kind of freak me out. Would you block his image?
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome, thanks. I don't think I've ever asked a guest before to block an avatar. I don't know what it is. Like I'm kind of squeamish about medical stuff in general, but something about those eyeballs as an avatar. I don't know why, but they kind of weird me out.
Yeah, we don't want to weird you out, so definitely blocking him.
Thanks, man. See, you're a good guest. That's why you're a good guest. You understand these things.
Yeah, I do what I'm told to.
Red Heater, you're very welcome. Glad that you're enjoying the responses. We have a question from Shifty, who asks you, David, if this is your normal HUD, and also if you always use prefixes on your HUD.
I actually very recently switched laptops, so I had to like use. I lost the HUD that I used to work with on my old laptop, and I didn't have the time to just get this back. So that's what I'm working with right now. But yeah, I'm definitely using prefixes just because I'm really bad at knowing what's really happening if I don't have them. So yeah, I am really. I think this is really enough for a regular spin. All those data is pretty much everything you really need. I think there are a lot of good HUDs out there that are maybe slightly better or even a lot better. However, usually those cost some money, and you just have to really think about whether you want to invest money into a HUD if you're playing very low stakes or something. So that's really something to very individually to consider.
Okay. Okay, well put. Welcome, Kick777. And I wanted to ask you about a hand that I was talking with somebody else about. And see, the thing is that your strongest point is post flop, which isn't to say that you have anything to be desired pre-flop, but in terms of like there are a lot of regs who are good at pre-flop, so I don't think that's a special. But this is still a pre-flop question that I was got into a debate with somebody about, and I'm just going to ask you this, okay?
Sure, fire away.
All right. We're heads up. We're in the button. I'm sorry, we're in the big blind. The effective stack is 18 blinds, and a reg shoves for 18 blinds on the button. You following me?
Yeah, I
Okay.
do.
If we have king queen suited in the big blind, is that close or is it clearly a call, clearly a fold?
Any specific information other than him being a reg? Any kind of like, I assume no ICM impacts or anything.
Well, heads up, there can't be ICM, right?
No, yeah, for sure. Yeah, you're right.
No, I guess that's a good question, but no, all we know is that he's a reg.
Okay. If we know that he's a reg, at like, let's say Yeah, I think against most regs, this is a pretty easy call because
Yes.
most of them are shoving like way too wide. If he's a reg, if he's a good reg, then that's a pretty
It's
easy call.
yeah, I totally agree with you. I think that you know, it's such an easy call. Like folding that would be so terrible if you were to fold king queen suited. Um, so I'm glad to hear that you agree with that. And also one thing that's to me kind of difficult about imagining that he's a good reg is, in my opinion, good regs. Oh, here we go. How does he
Ooh.
have queens there? He limp, right?
Yeah, I have no idea.
Oh
I think
man,
I just got trapped really hard.
you've got to stack off there. Um,
Yeah.
Good regs aren't doing a lot of open shoving heads up at 18 blinds. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think most people's ranges are extremely face up there to like actually I see if people do this, I see weaker kings quite a bit. I do see a lot of small pocket pairs that people are scared to play any other
Yeah,
way.
small pocket pairs definitely.
And
Some low aces.
some low aces for sure, yeah. But again, I mean, overall, you know, just if we do the math, then there don't really have to be a lot of even weaker kings to make this a very easy call with king queen suited.
Right, exactly. Because also it's not like he's going to be open shoving queens plus. Um,
Yeah,
and
that's what.
I think if he does have a hand like ace queen off in his open shoving range for 18, then I think that would be a huge leak.
Yeah, for sure. And I don't think any reg's ever really going to do this unless he has like some super specific reads that you're just calling it off too wide at 18 big blinds or something and
Right,
basically
you just
exploit you that way. But
call like top 80% for 18 blinds, and he just
yeah,
jams any top like 40% hands. So,
but I
um,
think it's more interesting to what to do with like I don't know, King Jack offsuit or maybe something like Ace 7 suited or so, because then it's really a lot more interesting just to think about what kind of range he's doing this with. Is he having a lot of Ace X or not? Or, you know, just all those kind of things are more interesting than with King Queen suited because you're doing so good against pairs as well.
right, right. Yeah, my answer would be that I would call probably down to King Jack offsuit, King 10 suited, um, Ace 7 suited. I would snap. I don't even think I would give it much thought. I think I would call Ace Deuce suited, Ace Ace 7 off. I would call. I want to give him too much credit.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense because people's range are just so unbalanced in those spots. Not to say that they have to be very balanced, but they're just really face up, as
Yes.
we just said, and a lot of small pocket pairs and stuff that they don't really want to play post flop with, and they are never showing up with top X% hands because that wouldn't make sense to, as we said,
Yes.
to just jam
Exactly.
like pocket tens or something.
Right. Right. You'd have to be pretty terrible player to do that. Shifty rates, sorry for an off topic question. Do you guys know what kind of ROI on 6 max hypers is possible nowadays, 7 and 15? Um, well, I can put out a guess. Do you have any impressions on that, David?
I honestly have no idea. The only time I play those games is if I play satellites,
Okay.
like coin satellites or formal FPP satellites. I don't really. I'm definitely not good enough to play those at probably any stakes without putting the work in.
Um, Shifty, I'm going to answer your question as well. But David, I got to get back to this hand. I would 3-bet shove that hand pre. Tell me, why do you flat there instead of shove?
Well, yeah, I think given his stats, that's actually a good point to just shove it in there. Given that he's been playing a lot, and yeah, that was just a mistake, I believe. Yeah, that
Okay,
was a
no
shove.
worries. Shifty, my answer would be that I also don't totally know. If I had to guess, I would say that the best regs are about 3% for 6 max hypers of that buy-in. The way you want to usually answer their question would be with like the Sharkscope leaderboard. You can filter for low stakes 6 max hypers, and you can look to see what the best regs are doing or if you have specific regs in your games that are good regs and they're not blocked on SharkScope, that's usually how I try to go about answering those questions.
Yeah, that's a very good approach to this. That's what usually helps you to just see how rich you can get at certain formats, I think.
Yeah, which is not as easy a thing these days in a lot of formats. I was looking recently at the 9-man turbo leaderboards for 2016, and I think the guy who was number one on that was like 3,000 for the year. That was about a week ago, and that is a real difference from a
Wow,
couple years ago.
that's a really interesting number. I don't know about heads up singles. I assume that it's still possible to make like 100K or something there. But however, I think that's only for a very small group of players.
Yeah, definitely. The top winners in Siningos are playing high stakes heads up SNG, and so there's definitely still the most ceiling in those formats. Good shove there. 10-9 suited. I wanted to ask you a little bit about balancing. There's been some discussion in a couple of the recent coaching sessions. As a first thing, do you think that, let's say somebody is grinding $7 spins, do you think that they have to give a lot of thought to balancing their range in different spots, or is that really not too applicable a concept?
I think absolutely not. I think this is only interesting if you play like in a format where you're going to face the same players a very reasonable amount of time. That means that you basically play like hundreds and thousands of hands against them. So that means cash games or MTTs where you're not playing in like tens of thousands of fields, but more like I personally play a lot of like smaller field short stack MTTs, and there you usually have the same reg. So I think their balancing makes a lot more sense. However, in like low stakes spins where the player pool is really huge, I don't really think that either you should do this and also not think too much about it because all your opponents are probably not thinking that way anyway. I mean, there are exceptions. You know, if there's someone you face a lot and you know you have some kind of history and you think that it makes sense to balance your range in certain spots against them, for sure you should do this. But I think that's very rare.
Yeah, that's a good answer. I think part of it, if you go back a few years ago, pretty much nobody would ask that question except for people playing higher stakes and, always playing against the same regs. And now you hear more and more players talk about balancing and stuff. I think part of it is just terms that have entered the poker lexicon, so to speak. Like, any player now basically has heard GTO and can say what it stands for. And they might not know much about it besides that. A good shove here with the ace nine. Um,
Oh,
let's give you a
we are
double
running
suck
so
out.
good.
Yes, ship it. All right, heads up. Um, and so people think, oh well, how do I play GTO? And so more and more people think about balancing. But I agree with that. I think that generally at lower stakes games, particularly lower stakes spins, it's not as important a concept. Um, Nathan Bernard rates, Colin, I did a week in $1 spins, 4% after 2,000 games. My heart can't take that variance. That's good, man. 4% after 2,000 games is good. And you played 2,000 spins in that week? If so, you're a serious grinder. I assume you played like 6 days, so you played over 300 spins a day. That's good.
That's definitely very good, and also a very good way to approach this to just see if just play a lot of games before you actually
Can,
think about in terms of ROI and all
pull,
that stuff. Just have a good sample
David, I'm
size.
sorry to interrupt you. Would you pull up that last hand? I just wanted to make sure you didn't exit this table before, because I wanted to talk about that for a sec. Um,
Yes, for sure.
and yeah, everything you're saying is totally true. But I want to get to this hand for a second because you you snap called the river. I know that when you did that, you had a plan. Before you got to the river, but I think this is important. Walk us through this hand.
For sure. So villain limbs, I think there's really nothing to discuss about pre-flop. I don't think
Right.
shoving here with Jack 3 is
Definitely.
the play. So we get a flop that is pretty good for us. We flop 2 pair on a flush board, so Jack 6 6. The thing is, people that are limping a lot of buttons. The strategy there is basically for them to limp a lot of buttons and then bet any flop to just take it down, which is standard and also good, which is something I do a lot too. So he's going to have a lot of air in his range once he does this. He's going to have some Jack X, some 6X. However, I think it's going to be a very air heavy range because there's really not much to be had on this flop anyway. And we also block some Jack X combos because we have a Jack ourselves. So we go ahead and check call, which is very standard. On the turn, actually, I was considering leading on the turn because as much air as he has in his range, I think people might spew a bit more if we just if we lead here, because if we check call on a Jack 6 6 flop, it's very likely that we connect it with this flop somehow, because we might also check raise some hard draws. So I think that people will shut down quite a bit if they think about the range that we check call this flop with. So I think leading makes them spaz out a bit more than checking. However, in this case, I decided to check call again, and he bets very small. That's also that also indicates to me that he is not very likely to have a 6, because there are a lot of draws out there. And as I said, if I check call this flop and he has a 6, it's pretty likely that I have a Jack. So which I'm not going to fold to a bigger bet size by him. So I think we have the best hand here a lot when he bets this small. So we go ahead and check call again. And the river is pretty much a perfect card, in my opinion, because when he limps pre-flop at like 8 or 9 big blinds, it's super unlikely, more or less impossible, unless he's trapping that he has some ace X. But also he will be bluffing this card a lot more than he should, because that's what people usually do when they get to the river like this, because they think that there's a scare card, because it's a card that's above the Jack, and some people might consider folding a Jack here, which would be atrocious, but some people do this, so they go ahead and way over bluff those cards, in my opinion. So one thing I'm worried here is the backdoor flush. That's really something that this would be annoying, but that's basically the only hand he could really have. I don't think he ever shows up with an ace for the reasons I mentioned. So really happy once he jams, because that also polarizes range a lot to like very weirdly played 6x that's a boat, a flush, or air. And so it's a very easy call given this range, and we call and we are right. And yet flush around the gutter.
Okay, awesome. A couple of things I want to say about this. One of them is that hand reading is so important. One of the absolute crucial pieces of this hand is your reading him on the river, and you say that the ace is a good card, even though it's an overcard, and even though it completes the flush. So a lot of players probably, when they see that ace, they're thinking, damn, this is not a good thing. Now we can have the better hand. And you said just the opposite. You said it's a really good card for us. And what that came down to was, one, the fact that he's a lot more likely to bluff a scare card like that, and two, a very simple fact that you point out, which is that most people are not going to limp on the button with a short stack and an ace. They're just going to shove and take that down pre-flop. And so just a simple observation like that, can be a huge part in a big decision like the river decision here.
Yes, and also I think that even if he somehow does limp with an ace, I think it's very unlikely that he bets 3 streets with it, because he would much rather, he has some showdown value, so it makes more sense for him to check at least 1 street, like flop or turn, but not min bet, and then shove the river with an ace. I think that's just very unlikely for him to actually have it then.
Right. And at the river, if he does have some kind of random ace, like you said, he's probably going to bet smaller. In general, overbets, like you were saying, they tend to polarize someone's range. If somebody overbets, it's more likely that they have air or a very strong hand, and usually that's fine. They're actually correct to be in a more polarized range when they overbet. Tachio Neridu, he has a question that you addressed a little bit, but I'll put it to you as he writes it. He says, "Why not raise on the flop?"
I think the problem with raising the flop is we are basically isolating us against hands that are better than ours, and we will discourage him from bluffing, which is the huge downside to just check raising flop. We really want him to be betting his air on the flop, on the turn, and on the river. So if once we check raise, we show so much strength that he will just fold out. We will just fold out all his bluffs and keep his better hands in there. I agree that if we check raise in this particular hand on the flop, we might just most likely get it in against his flush draw. However, if he had like an 8-4 offsuit, he would just fold. But if he might have just bet the turn with an 8-4 offsuit as well, and we would have missed that bet. So I think overall, check raising flop is not good with Jack 3 here.
Okay. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I actually would probably have check raised. Can you go back to the turn for a second also?
Sure.
One thing that's interesting with the turn is the sizing is super small, right? He bets, what does he bet? He bets 40 into 240?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, he bets 40 into
Into 160?
into 160.
I mean, we're almost giving him a free card when we just check call. I mean, to me, okay, my thought process kind of would have been, I get what you're saying about the flop, but when he bets 40 into 160, the pot's 200. So relative to the effective remaining stack, the pot is pretty huge. There are a ton of draws out there, and that the pot's big enough that I would go for it at that point. What do you think about that thought process?
Yeah, I think that's definitely something to consider here. However, I still think that his range is so weak, and that usually people, if they, I mean, obviously I'm wrong if I assume this and he has this hand, but I was just thinking that if he has a big draw, he would most likely just bet it bigger, just set up a better stack to pot ratio on the river to just jam any river. So I wasn't really putting like such a strong draw into his range, and I think it's just really, I mean, even though there are a lot of draws, I think it's just a disaster if he folds and we discouraging from bluffing. I think that outweighs the times that we get outdrawn, because
Okay.
also we have the 3 that is also a reasonable card for him to either have or let him complete a straight or something. So we also block kind of a bit there, which is not a huge thing, but at least something. So I'm more on the side of letting him bluff away.
Okay, great. I think that's enough on that hand. It's a very interesting hand. If you guys have any questions or opinions on that hand, by all means type them in. So let's go to the next game. But
Sure. I think
very
I won.
interesting hand and thought process there. Regardless of what you guys might do on, for example, the turn. Definitely think about the thought process there in every street. Like, for example, the fact that ace of spades was actually a good card for us. Because also, even if you kind of recognize something like that in post-game analysis, it can be kind of tough to see that when you're actually playing. So 6-4
Does that work with the sizing? Sorry, does that work with the sizing of the table?
yeah,
Because
let
I
me
just
take a look. Yeah,
had
that's
to.
perfect. That's great.
Okay, great, great.
A 6-4 offsuit, is that a standard min raise from the small blind and a spin?
Yeah, I think readless. I would go for this unless I get the reason not to do it.
But against a reg, you would fold.
Yeah, against a
Okay.
rec, I would fold.
Okay.
I think here I'm making a pretty big 3-bet. We get a call, so somewhat standard. We flop huge and get a snap fold. Oh, he still has outs. So again, heads up in the second hand, which is good.
Yeah, yeah.
Against a player also now that we have a little bit of info from, because we saw that he was just snap calling a 3-bet pre-flop, which was pretty big. So that kind of leads me to think that he's not really thinking a lot about it, but more like if he has a hand that he wants to get to the flop with, he is not going to fold it.
Right. Nice. Yeah, it seems like he's making pretty instinctive decisions. Um,
Yes, he's doing his stuff extremely fast. So um, I think that that piece of info shows me that I should be value betting a lot wider and bigger, and probably bluffing a tad less, because he will just get to showdown too often to make too many multi-street bluffs or something.
Right, right.
And also, I don't really see a point here to min raise a lot when he will just flat, and we have to play an inflated pot with like 8-4 offsuit, for example.
So would you then be playing a very exploitive style on the button, min raising? You're min raising decent hands and limping junk, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, great.
This year is just a pretty standard value bet, I think, with ace nine against someone who doesn't fold much to anything really. So, and he pots the river, so that's a very easy fold, because once he calls this flop, I mean, there's really not much to discuss, especially when the flush card comes in on the turn. As much as I love hero calling, I think here that's burning money.
Yeah,
Is
there
this
was some.
avatar okay, by the way, or should we block this
You know,
again?
man, that is an awesome question. You're definitely you've got my back on this. I think that's acceptable. I kind of feel like if you zoomed in a little bit, I might need you to block it, but that particular avatar, I'm gonna sign off on.
Okay, that's great. Here I'm actually thinking about how to size my river bet, because I think if he has like, if he doesn't have a pair, he's going to fold a lot, obviously. But if he does have a pair, he's going to call big bets too. So I'm actually opting for a big river bet, and make him decide whether he wants to hero call or not.
Yeah, yeah, that's good. And you know, if you have an extreme enough read against some of these guys, you can also overbet. You know, like if you river the nuts or something, and you know the guy's just never going to fold a pair. Um, Overbetting can be pretty good. Shifty rates avatar. I often get the impression that people use a picture of themselves. They are 90% fishes. What's your thought on that? You know, there was a number of years ago, and I'm sure this is somewhere still out there. I think it was Space Gravy, maybe, who did a blog on what your avatar says about you. And so it was like if you have a golf related avatar, there's a 98% chance you're a fish. If you have a picture of your baby, then there's like a 90% chance. And he just quantified it based on exactly what kind of avatar. I think if someone has a picture of themselves, then I don't know. I mean, it could be a picture of a friend. I don't know if that says a lot. What do you think, David?
I think there's a lot of truth to that. I think that you can definitely read a lot into people's avatars. I think that saying that someone who has a picture of himself is 90% of fish might be a stretch. However, I think there's definitely truth to that, and I personally love to see people who have their pets as avatars. Like a dog
Oh
is a
yeah.
very, very strong indicator of someone who is clueless. But I also saw some MTT Rex who were leveling with this. Some very, very good players who had their dog in there. So it really
That
depends a lot on who you're facing. But if we face, for example, someone with a low VIP level, he's, I think, what's that, Silver Star? Yeah, and himself in the picture, I think the chances that he's not that great at poker are somewhat higher than usual, as if he had his avatar blocked, for example. So there, Shifty said this. I think that there's definitely truth.
Okay, well played, Shifty. Nathan adds the biggest fish avatars are sport team logos, babies, or couple avatars. This is pretty cool. We could all come up with a modern rendition of that article. I wish I could remember. I think it was Space Gravy, but I'll look for it at some point. All in here, and we get the suck out. Awesome. Radio Radoslaw has a question about the Queen Jack hand, um, where you triple
Yeah.
barrel. Maybe the best thing to do is once you beat this guy, that we go back to that. And
Uh, That looks good. I'll
That's a
just
good start. He's
search for
drawn
it.
thin.
I was actually hoping to get some questions on the Queen Jack hand because I thought it was interesting. So I'll just put it up on the side.
Good job, Radislaw. Everyone else is just like mindlessly nodding, and you're the one who spots the hand. Well done. User Kill says lucky flop. Yeah, that was a pretty nice flop. Ace-8 off. A lot of people. I'm seeing more and more people just open shove that at 14 blinds, but I much prefer your min raise. I think that looks really good. Do you sometimes check back that flop?
Yeah,
with
I
the ace
do.
high
I
showdown
do for
value?
sure.
Okay.
I do for sure. Now I think once we get to this river, I'm actually considering a bluff here, just to get him to fold his 5x. But I guess yeah, I think that's
Wow,
something we have to consider.
I would have definitely checked back and given up against that guy, but I like that. I think that that is a pretty big part of his range, and even someone who doesn't think at a very high level, like this guy probably doesn't, is probably going to fold a 5 there when there's a Jack Queen King. So I like that. This is a value raise, right?
Yes, for sure.
Okay. The Poker Blueprint from Aaron Davis and Try Win talks about avatars too. That's good to know.
Yeah, I think avatars are actually reading something into avatars is an underrated skill at poker. You really have to find your edge, and I think if you're good at reading avatars, that's probably something to capitalize on.
Yeah, definitely. You know what we should do? We should get one week some sort of like tarot card reader or like a psychic, a mystic on here, and ask them questions like about how to make certain cards come, stuff like that.
Oh, we sucked out again. That was
That was
gross.
awesome.
And so now I think I've got the hand pulled up
Okay.
here as well.
Let's check this
So
out.
yeah, that was an interesting hand. Happy that there are some questions there. Because I think I've played it in a kind of unusual way for some players, because I think that's where the question rose from. We min raise with Queen Jack against this player standard. He doesn't seem to be 3-betting a lot, and if he did 3-bet a lot, we should definitely consider limping here, because we would be kind of hating our life if we face a shove over a min raise at 23 big blinds effective with Queen Jack, because we can't really call off. So we would be better off just seeing a flop. However, against this player, standard open, he flats. And very, very dry flop, very easy c-bet just to get him off, like King X basically, which is the only end we could consider checking back to. However, on boards like this, I think people give the initial raise way too much credit, which makes sense because it's such a dry board and there's really not much to be had, and people don't really spaz out too much. So I think c-betting here is the safer play actually than to just check back and give this guy realized equity for 3. We make a very small c-bet and he calls. On the turn, we make a pair, and given that he A, didn't 3-bet pre, B, didn't check raise the flop, I think we have the best hand on the turn quite a bit, especially as wide as he's been calling our c-bets. So given all this information, I decided to value bet this turn card with our second pair against 8x, deuce x, some weirdo draws like straight draws like a 3-4, 3-5. Maybe he picked up a backdoor or a flush draw or something that he's not looking to fold. So there are a couple of hands that we can get value from still. So we bet slightly less than half pot. He calls. And river is a 6. And he checks to us again. And I decided to make a small value bet here again, basically against his 8x hands, which I think are a big part of his range. And, the thing is that I think we got beat here because he's at ace-5, yeah. That's basically the price you pay if you decide to exploit someone and value bet very thinly. But I still think that this is the better play, because I think we are going to have the best hand here more often than not, the way it played out. And I think that he is not looking to fold an 8 for such a small bet on the river. So I think overall, like my line here a lot, and I think he will show up with an ace X a lot less than people might think. That's really all there's to it.
Yeah, yeah, and one thing that's interesting is that this guy isn't going to check raise the river much, right? So if we're value betting, the criteria we have is that we want to have greater than 50% equity against his check call range. That doesn't mean we have 100% equity. We can make this bet over and over in similar situations, and he calls us with the best hand some real percent of the time, and still a profitable value bet.
Yes, exactly. And it's also a very good point you make that we are not worried about getting check raised on the river, like ever, as a bluff. So I think if he check raises the river, we're facing two pair or better, basically every single time. He's not check raised bluffing the river ever. So I think it's very, very safe bet against a weaker player.
Yeah, yeah, awesome. We have couple of questions. Shifty, your question is a more general one, which I will ask in just a moment. Let me get to the questions on this hand. Kick says, why would he check raise the flop here? You use the fact that he didn't check raise the flop as evidence against him having an ace. Probably he's not really going to be check raising this flop much at all, right?
Yes, I agree with this. Definitely true that he's not going to check raise a significant portion of the time. However, people still weaker players still tend to like overplay their top pair hands. So this is a very small piece of information. However, I think it's still a valuable piece of information that he didn't put a lot of pressure on us.
Okay, great. Tachianurdi says, I think I will bet more on river. I don't know if I agree with that, because the thing is that we're going for him to hero call us. He might not perceive it that way. It's not like he's going to be telling his friends on Skype, I heard him on the river. But we're trying to get him to call with a relatively weak hand. And some of the time you can get good players to out-level themselves if you value bet thin with larger bets. But against a recreational player, I usually like, if we have a thin value bet, just betting smaller.
Yes, I agree with this. This comes down to whether we know the player or have some kind of history with him. Against some, I would actually consider just shoving for value on the river. If you have a lot of history playing, for example, heads up sit and goes against someone or so, then this becomes a easy shove against some people. So it really depends. But against him, that we don't know too much about, and we really want him to call with a very wide range, and we think that he's kind of an ABC guy who will fold the weaker part of his range to bigger bets and call to smaller bets. I think that's a good sizing.
Right. And the last question is from Louis69, who writes, do you think he'll really call 3 times with an 8? Not sure if you still have a bet on the river. One thing I would say about that is, a lot of times in low-stakes games, you're going to find guys who basically don't like to fold a pair. And the way to exploit that is when you have a decent pair, to be more aggressive betting it. Also, this guy could have check-called the flop with some kind of random queen, and we basically have the nut queen, so...
Yes, definitely. So,
Okay.
yeah, I think that we can bet 3 suits for value here. Checking the river is not terrible, but as I said, I don't think he shows up with an ace often enough to make this a check back.
Okay. All right, I think that's good on this hand, and some very good questions on it, nice analysis. While you're pulling up the next game, let me ask Shifty's question, which is another one you've addressed a little bit, but I'll pose to you. He asks, why do you limp such a big range on the button?
Actually, I don't think you think he's probably talking about heads up.
Heads up, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's because I think I have my edge in those games comes from playing post flop, and I get into more post flop spots when I limp rather than if I raise, because people then tend to 3-bet more, which is just very, very clear thing I did, because I think my edge is more in the post flop game than in the pre flop game, and I like to get into post flop spots with people. And the way to do this is just to limp more.
And Shifty, let me also get you to consider something, okay? Consider an opponent who is totally loose passive, right? If we limp, he's never going to raise. If we raise, he's always just going to call. Against that kind of opponent, how would you play against him pre-flop? Well, if you had any kind of top 50% hand, then you'd probably raise because you have good equity against his 100% calling range, and you also have position on him. If you had some kind of junk hand, I mean, you'd still want to play it because you have position, you're getting 3 to 1, but you wouldn't want to build the pot. So most players aren't going to fall into a category that's that extreme, but we can kind of go from that extreme situation to construct our strategy against someone who plays similar.
Yes, I agree with this. I think that just limping a lot more is actually better than people just tend to have like a somewhat some kind of game plan that they want to be aggressive pre-flop and min raise a lot, and that has been the case, for example, for heads up singles to basically min raise 100% of buttons, which has been the play like a year and a half ago. But that changed a lot, and people limp a lot more because they realize that people adjust to this, and it's very easy to adjust to someone who min raises too much.
Yeah, now the other thing about it is, I assume you would agree with me, that limping on the button becomes a lot more complicated when you're up against a good player compared to a fish.
Yes,
Because then,
that's
they can raise you, they can shove, they can do things that are kind of annoying. But it's much easier against somebody that you don't have a lot of history with and that, is going to play very straightforward. And so, you can take advantage of that. And limping is one way to do that. Nice everything in that hand. Too bad he folds.
Yes, I think against good players, that whole thing goes out of the window quite a bit because we get into a lot more spots where we don't know what to do, and people who are good will realize that we have a very wide limping range, so a very weak limping range, and if we don't mix in some good hands, then we're basically very easy to play against.
Right.
But that's something to adjust if we face somebody who really tries to exploit us in that way.
Right. In this hand, you fold 7-6 suited on the button. If the effective stack were 600, well, it couldn't be that we all had 600 here, but hypothetically, I assume you would have opened the 7-6 suited. You just didn't want to have to call off small blind?
Exactly.
Okay.
I think here we can actually
Yeah, I agree with that.
big blinds. We can min raise call off small blind and then fold to a big blind. Big blinds doesn't seem to be too aggressive here given his stats. Hasn't been three betting at all, and he flats, which is weird. In those spots, I usually just tend to get it in and not think too much about it.
Yeah, just based on the stack to pot ratio. Someone's asking about the 8-7 hand. I think that's the one where you turn to straight. And what do you think about shoving the river after two quick calls earlier in the hand?
I basically just didn't want him to hero fold the river, and once he calls very, very quick, I think it's unlikely that he has a straight. So if he doesn't have a straight, it's tough for him to have anything really to call three big bets. So I just really wanted him to call with the weaker part of his range, and I didn't think that he would do this if I shoved.
In that hand with the 3 deuce off you displayed where you limp the button, are you checking turn and river for similar reasons to when you said the guy basically never had an ace on the river in the Jack 3 hand, that basically you thought that he would know you couldn't really rep those hands after limping pre?
Yeah, kind of. The thing that made me really want to check there as well is that every single draw that I could have had on the flop just whiffed on the river, and people really hate to fold once all the draws missed. So I think that makes it a lot tougher. If the flush came in, I would have considered bluffing. However, once the board breaks out, basically, I think even bad hand readers will realize that we have a lot more bluffs than made hands in our range when those turn river cards hit.
Okay, good. And this is going back to the same strategy as before. This guy doesn't seem to be putting too much pressure on pre-flop, and so your response to that is, I guess, if you're playing three deuce off, it's probably safe to say that you are not folding many buttons.
Yes, that's very true. I think here we can definitely consider bluffing three streets because we haven't been too aggressive against him recently, and it's tough for him to have a straight because he cannot have an ace, really, because you would get in more money pre, so.
Oh, here we go. Check raise coming.
Ah,
Man.
I was feeling it.
I like the fast pace in this match. Did you watch, one of the things that got me into poker initially was watching WSOP broadcast the year that Raymer won. In the year that Raymer won, the guy who took second was David Williams. And David Williams, even when it was extremely deep in the main, there were like, well, even when it was literally heads up, he probably averaged about half a second per decision. It'd be like a tremendous pot on the turn, and he would instantly check and then instantly call. And at the time, I was like, man, this is so cool. This is awesome. And I don't really know where I'm going with this story, but it's kind of cool when people act fast, I guess.
I also hate it when people take a lot of time making their decisions. I mean, it's a lot more annoying in live poker than in at online poker because you're usually playing more tables online anyways. But I think in live poker, it's if someone really takes like a minute every single time he wants to fold 6-3 offsuit under the gun, I think that's really bad for the games, and I think people really do not have to do this. I think that it's good to have a routine whenever you get dealt a hand and look at it and make your decision and take your time to make your decision, but some decisions in poker are automatic and people know that they are automatic. So
absolutely. And there are people who even in live tournaments, they will pause before they even look at their hand. Action, I've seen guys, action will get to them, and they have their hands, and before they even look at their hand, they kind of sigh, and they look around to the left, they look around to the right. People have some completely ridiculous rituals.
Yeah, for sure. I haven't played a ton of live poker in my life, a bit, but not too much. But I also thought that some people do very, very weird stuff when playing poker. And basically, just even against someone who is always playing behind a computer, make some stuff that really shows their hand.
Right. They started calling time on a guy that did that at the EPT in Dublin just last week. Yeah, I believe that. I've seen a lot of people tweeting recently about this sort of, I don't know if campaign is the right word, but this movement to start calling the clock more aggressively on people. And to me, that seems like a decent way to do it. Sorry, go on.
And I also think that you should be calling the clock more aggressively on those people as well. It doesn't really make much sense to let them get there. The hand before with Ace-5 was basically a trap because he was attacking my limits way too much. So I decided to trap here with Ace-5 off to make him snap off a shove, which didn't work.
Do you think against most players, if you limp pre on the button, that you can profitably bet any flop when they check to you?
Yes, against most, that's true. I mean,
that kind of surprises me a little bit. I mean, there's some flops that I, obviously the vast majority of the time you want to bet, but I don't have 100% betting frequency in spots like that.
No, I think 100% is maybe a bit off, but I think we should have a very high betting frequency because people just adjust to this sort of strategy really, really bad. And obviously, if we flop like, I don't know, we limp 8-7 and flop is like queen 8-5 or so. I think there are merits for us to check back the flop because we're kind of pot controlling a bit, and we're not getting 3 streets of value against weaker hands against most. But that's really a rare case for me.
Right.
That's a very interesting line. So this guy seems to be somewhat aggressive from those, judging from those 2 hands so far.
Yeah, yeah, it definitely seems that way. And then of course we get a high pocket pair and he snap folds. Pretty standard shove with the pocket 5s and
Yeah, there's really nothing he can do there.
heads up.
Now heads up against an aggressive player, I think that's a limit for all the reasons I discussed so far. I think given that we have 2 overcards to the 6 and he's very aggressive, I think we can just peel one off and then we turn a gutter, so we have an easy bet on the turn. And then on the river, I think there's a bluff to get him off 6x as well.
Come on, fold. Nice. Nice.
So he ISOs us a bit when we limp, so we might have to think about our limping range a bit and maybe not add an A3 offsuit. But yeah, it's still limp wide though.
Yeah.
Like queen 8 and then basically call a raise if it's not like super huge, because we can still play a pot in position. Against a pot size bet, I think floating here is not a good play.
Right. IMO, all tournaments should have like a 2-minute max to act. It's one table. Yeah, that's true. I mean, that's the idea of the shot clock. I don't know. I think logistically there could be some difficulties with that, but it could definitely help solve the problem. That last hand, you Chuck called the flop when he potted it, right?
Yes.
When he bets that large, are you kind of concerned that you're going to check call the flop, just have to fold to a lot of turns?
Yeah, that was what I was thinking about. However, I also thought that he would just have so much air in his range when he takes when he takes on, not have air, but maybe like not, he doesn't necessarily have to have an ace every single time, or 6 for that matter. So I think that even against a pot size bet, against someone who always, or who very likely bets pot in a lot of spots, I think we kind of have to peel one off, especially with our backdoor flush draw as well. However, if he jams the turn, we basically we can't do too much, so we have to fold, especially against someone who we presume to be not a great player and someone who most likely makes bigger mistakes in the future, and we can give up in that spot.
Right. Okay. Let me ask you a different kind of question, which is, like, if I'm coaching someone and I want to tell them about how to improve pre-flop, it's not all that hard, right? Because in particular, there's so much software to help with pre-flop. And there are a lot of people now that, are decent pre-flop and looking to improve post-flop. How do you study post-flop and figure out what the line is and improve post-flop?
Wow, that's a pretty tough question, actually.
Yeah, I guess it is now I think about it.
I think there's really not like some kind of white magic to it, as some of the more popular TV poker players suggest. I think it comes down a lot to logic, and what I can personally just speak for myself there, because that's what helped me to get better post flop, is actually reading forums and talking to people. I think the 2+2 forums, or any other poker strategy forum or whatever for that matter, they offer a lot of very good hand discussion sections where you can talk to people and get a good grasp on hands. And usually those spots are, depending on the form you're looking at, those spots go multi-way, so it's a multi-street, so it doesn't really end pre-flop or on the flop most likely. So there's some hand reading involved, and that's what actually made me a better hand reader.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because now that I'm thinking about it, I guess so much of post flop really comes down to the specific skill of hand reading, right? Like if you were a great hand reader, it would be tough to not be a pretty good post flop player. So a lot of it is probably just practicing hand reading, and you can do that. You can filter in tracking software and for hands that go to showdown that you don't see, and while you're actually playing, you can guess at hands. I mean, that's probably a pretty big chunk of it right there.
Yes, I agree with this. There's actually a lot of like little things that you can do. Something you could also consider is, if you're not familiar with playing deeper stacked, and you usually, if you try to work on your hand reading skills, you have to play a bit deeper stacked, because otherwise you couldn't go multi streets. So you could also do this by, for example,
Nice.
get into like a super low stakes cash game with your friends or whatever, and just
Oh,
buy in very very deep, and then just for stakes that don't really hurt you, but you could also just really try to outplay each other and all that stuff. Just play like a 5 cent 10 cent game with, like, I don't know, like $50 buy-in or so, where you're super deep stacked and have to face decisions that are tough, and just do that kind of stuff as well.
pull up the replayer for this table if you don't mind. We have one question about a hand. Yeah, that's I remember one time I've been playing poker for a couple of years, and I ended up playing with some friends at a buy-in that was very trivial for me based on the games I was playing online. And I started playing at that point, because this was like 2006. Online, I played ridiculously tight, which was the right way to play, in fairness to me. But and during this game, I started doing things that I would never do online, and like I was flatting a lot in position just because I didn't want to be bored and fold when it would cost. I don't remember what the stakes were, but yeah, something like 5 cent, 10 cent, and I ended up, even though it was like a drunk game with friends, actually feeling like I learned a lot just because I saw situations that I never got into when I played online. So I definitely like your advice there.
Yes, I really think this is awesome, and I think there was, even though I'm not like a huge fan of like TV pros or whatever, but I think Gus Hansen also wrote a book where he won a tournament or something and basically played every single, or close to every single hand. And he gave his reasoning was actually pretty smart, because he said, if you play by like charts or something, then you don't really face spots where you face like three barrels and have to call off with like bottom pair or so, or get into spots that are more difficult, because you don't really get to play those hands pre-flop anyway. And I think that's a smart thing to consider. And actually, that's what makes sense if you play like a cash game with trivial stakes, but also with deep stacks.
Yeah. Okay, very good. The question here, I don't actually remember this hand. Did you have King 4 earlier in this table?
Let me check. Let me check.
The question. Oh
There's
yeah,
King
yeah.
4.
Okay. Let's look at this hand here.
Okay. Limbs, and I check the big blind. And
So the question is, why not call 20 with the gut shot?
that's well, I think that it's not a huge deal to whether we fold or call here. However, I think that we do not get paid often enough. We don't have the great implied odds if we hit our hand, because then there's a 4 card straight out there and people will likely get scared. And we basically cannot continue on any turn card that's not a jack. So even though we get a good price there at 4-1, I think that really doesn't justify the call here, especially with a one guy behind on the button.
Yeah, I was just about to say. To me, that's a really important point too. We don't close the action here. He's the one who's shown the most strength by playing the hand on the button. So I would fold that as well.
Yes, I think if we had like king four of diamonds, that would make things easier, and then we would call because we could call more turn cards or actually play more poker on more turn cards because we can also raise a couple diamonds or so. But I think offsuit that's a fold for me.
Okay. Next game.
Sure. So given that we're deeper into this, I think we can now up the stakes a bit
Let's do
and
it.
see whether we can being like big one.
I would definitely use some nice drama on this coaching.
But I think in this coaching so far, we had the highest multipliers. I think we have 228s or so 4x multipliers, which I think we didn't have before, ever.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
So we're still running
there.
hot. So as we see here, I have quite a bit of hands on this player here, 279. So that kind of makes my decision here easier. Readless, I think I would tend to raise this more often than not. However, against someone in a big blind who 3-bets 25% of the time over a decent sample, I think that makes this a fold.
Yeah. Yeah, I've got to give up there. So here,
We would be checking back.
okay, okay,
But I think against the min bet, I think we'll just pill one off and see what happens. Obviously, great plan is always to bink, but that's annoying because I think now he doesn't have king x all that often, if ever. So he's going to fold queen x a bit. We really have to make him hero call now, which I think is unlikely if he even had queen x to begin with.
right. And that's another thing that in a few recent coachings we've talked about how small bets tend to be weaker. So he bet 20 into 80 or 100 or whatever, and so that's going to make it so that most of the time we float or bluff raise.
Yes, I would have floated a lot wider than ace x there, just to be able to take it away on future streets.
Right.
Here, if button raises against some players who have a very, very good stack to shove in the big blind, I would be flatting just to trap the big blind. However, this guy doesn't seem to fall into that category, so I would have 3-bet if the button raised.
3-bet small, right? Not 3-bet all in.
Yes, 3-bet like 100-ish or so.
Right, right.
It's a good flop because king is blocked now, and we hold.
All right. Heads up in the first 15. Let's take this guy down. So you have the stats on him indicating he's a fairly aggressive player. So I'm guessing we're not going to be playing all buttons against him.
No, definitely not, because then we would get punished too much. And we also, what we should do though is 4-bet wider, because you 3-bet so much. It's a very a standard assumption that if he 3-bets a lot, then we have to adjust to that by just 4-betting more, which is something I would consider here.
Right.
He doesn't limp much pre at all. And here we have pretty easy value bets. It would actually be super gross if he shoved the river, because then I wouldn't really know what button to click. I guess fold, but it seems super weird to just fold trips. But I also don't see him bluffing if we bet this big.
Yeah, I mean, we would pretty much have a bluff catcher if he shoved there.
Yes, he's going to have a lot of flushes that he slow played. I don't think we have history that he knows that I will be betting a lot and a lot of streets, and that he can shove there. So yeah, here he
It's
limped,
kind of
and
weird he limps. I mean, obviously it doesn't matter. It's not like any action he took you would have potentially folded pre, but kind of weird he limped there.
yeah, especially with a hand that doesn't really play great post flop. I think
Right, right.
it's definitely a weird limp. Here I check back because I don't really see any merit in betting flop. If he calls on the turn, we could consider value betting against 5x. However, it's also very possible that he has a king here or a better jack that he's not going to fold. So I think with like jack, queen, we could consider a value betting, but I
Yeah,
think jack 8, that's just too weak of a hand.
yeah, he probably would have folded his queen there. It's my guess, at least.
Yes, I think so. Oh, we got punished here by limping. So he's going to min raise a lot of buttons.
Oh, this is
And
going to be the ultimate revenge. I was going to say, if you shove pre, and then we could have typed in, remember the pocket eights in your face.
against some, I would consider checking back here, but I think he has 6x quite a bit. Also some 3x, so I think we're just going to bet 3 times here. We'll lose value by checking a turn card where we obviously turn the nuts pretty much, but yeah, he also even has a 3, so it's
Oh,
a cooler for him, but
yes. It's awesome. We're going to make him regret his pocket eights. He's not happy. You think it's too obvious to bet out on that turn card?
on the
On the 3
but
turn?
yeah, I think that's I think I think
Like
it's
against weaker
close.
players, that's a pretty good strategy, I think. You know, they check back and then the turn pairs and you bet out. But against someone who's more aggro, when they check back flop, a lot of the time they have some showdown value, and then they know that.
I think this is somewhat close. And I don't think how deep are we? 19 big blinds. I don't think we can call this off. Might have to do some calculations on that, but I think that's closer than what people actually think.
Yeah, that is
As
pretty
much as he's
close.
been.
User kill says fold. I agree with that. I
I
think
also think
that's
that he just saw us limping with pocket nines, so he knows that we have some stronger hands in our limping range, and he still decides to shove there. So
right.
our limping range is not as weak as it has been like a couple hands ago. So and he knows that, so that makes me want to fold queen jack.
Right. And this is a good example of the fact that our limping strategy is just depends a lot on our opponent. And against a lot of guys, you didn't do anything to balance your open limping range, and you shouldn't have. And against this guy, you have, so it just depends a lot. And nice call down there.
I'm really scared to limp now. He just kept punishing me too much. I
He's
think with like Queen X, we could actually consider peeling one off, because I don't think he will bet turns often enough, and we get to showdown a bit. But I think with Jack X, it's too wide to check call and try to get to showdown with.
right. Here we go.
Oh, that's a gross flop. how do people flop sets? It's so tough.
Yeah. And we'll,
Ugh.
that's got to be pretty close in EV between us getting the blinds without a fight versus calling it off for a 9 with a low offsuit ace. I don't actually know if we're rooting for a shove there.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, we are not crushing anything really. So yeah, you're right with that.
Jack 9, pretty standard for 7 or 8 blinds.
Oh, we still got some folds. That's good.
You're so
Okay, with
eager to
eight.
call this off. You just can't wait to call with the 10-9 suited.
Yeah, we have a monster. We have such a monster.
Come
hand.
on.
Oh,
Yeah. What a luck box.
as we see now, we only up the stakes a bit, but we already have like a supernova playing and people who seem to have a clue like the guy before. So the difference between 7s and 15s seems to be bigger than, for example, between 3s and 7s.
Yeah, I agree with that. And some of it also just comes down to time of day and luck of the draw because, regs obviously play more tables than recreational players. So if you get a few regs who are all registering at once, some of the time you just happen to face tougher opposition temporarily. This is kind of an interesting spot.
Yeah, I agree.
Is that? I mean, that's got to be kind of close. For example, at the turn, right?
Yeah, given that he bet somewhat small, 100 into 240, I thought peeling one off here was still the play. Actually, that's something that I'd really have to check myself and really think about and be honest about his range there for leading twice might actually be a fold. I'm not 100% positive that was the right call on the turn.
Okay.
If he, for example, leads a lot of top pairs without a diamond, for example, I think that really makes it a call. But if he leads like all of his nut flush draws there, I think that's really really close. This is something I would min raise fold against.
Yeah, low offsuit aces tend to make pretty good candidates to min raise fold. Yeah, I mean, I guess the first thing we saw out of that supernova was when he flatted the small blind after re-min raise button, and I'm guessing you agree that there are times when the button raises and you should flat small blind, but not a ton of hands, right? I mean, stuff like maybe ace 8 off and jack 10 suited, hands like that.
Yes, it also depends a lot on the big blind stack and the big blind's tendencies. Like for example, I think he should have a tighter flatting range there because the big blind is a bit shorter stack. So that makes it tough for him to flat super wide because the big blind will jam a lot more than if he had like a full stack. So yeah, I think he should be flatting a bit, but it really depends on who's in the big blind and what kind of stack he has.
Yeah, definitely. Back to facing someone who's taking his time. 22 blind open shove. Kind of categorizes him as a recreational player.
Yes, I don't think the supernova would have made the play a lot. As we discussed before, it's a very face-up range. That was interesting too. He snap min raised a very very coordinated board. So he doesn't really seem to be super good.
Yeah.
I guess the supernova is going to punish us here a lot if we limp. And even if he just makes it 2.5x, I think it's tough for us to play with queen 8 offsuit out of position against him. We've limped 2 of our small blinds so far, and he's been attacking both of them. So that makes me consider limp shoving some hands such as like king 9 suited, king 10 off or so.
Yeah, and that just goes back to our earlier discussion too about how much more difficult it can be to play against someone who's more aggressive in terms of limping. And I mean, it's fine. It's not any reason to not limp. It's just that you have to think, what your full range is going to be and how you're going to respond if they're raising a lot. Fortunately, though, he's the one who busts, and we're heads up against this guy. What are our impressions so far of this opponent?
First of all, he doesn't seem to be super good because he makes very, very huge bets in a lot of spots pre-flop. However, he doesn't seem to be 3-betting much, which leads me to maybe min-raising a bit more than I would normally do against perceived to be bad player. Yeah, that's basically it so far.
Okay, perfect.
I think on this flop, I'm just going to raise to get a good stack to get it in on the turn, because there's so many hands that he calls with ones such as Jack 10, Jack 9, all those hands.
Oh, this spot kind of sucks.
Yeah, that's really annoying, especially if he
he bets like a 1/80th of pot. Why can't he just shove? But you're continuing on here. Are you calling turn with the plan of calling it off on the river?
I guess so, if he bets this small.
Wow, nice.
I assume those are blocking bets a lot, and we get such good odds that. Yeah. And I also think that he would jam the river the way he's been playing, because he's not great, obviously. He would be jamming the river if he had a straight a lot.
This is very similar to our hand.
Given that he's not a reg though, but given that he lost the hand before and kind of tanked a bit here, I'm actually inclined to call it off here.
Oh,
because I think we'll be shoving well.
I really wish we had the best hand, so that would kind of prove my point more. In fact, we have the worst hand. But see, even here, when he's got ace 10 off, we're getting some odds pre. It's not like that's massively minus EV.
Yeah, I agree. I think this is a call. Not this hand though, but
in that hand when you had the queen on the 9 or 8 jack queen flop, and the turn was a 9, and he bet small, I think I would have puke folded that hand. And thinking about it more, you're right. I mean, it does kind of look like he's just making block bets. So I think that probably is a pretty nice call down that I may not have made.
Well, I think it's close, but I think that he's not going to bet 2 pair like this. So I think that he will. Oh, we actually have some equity here, but we don't get there. I think that's as you said, it's close, but I just think that he will not be betting straight or 2 pair this small. So if he had 2 pairs possible, but I think that he is very unlikely to have a straight. So if he doesn't have a straight, we have the best hand quite a bit, and we get super great odds on the river. So that makes it a call for me.
Okay. And this is going to be our last game. We're an hour and a half in, so let's play this one. And if you guys have more questions, type them in, and we'll get all of your questions answered. Yes. Scott, I hope that you are now listening to this a little bit late in the coaching, but glad that you made it on. A nice value bet here, I think, after the turn. The turn went check, right?
Yes.
So yeah, we probably pretty confident in our trips at that point.
Yeah, definitely. Bit annoying that he has a perfect stack to check jam on us there, but okay.
King 8.
That's loose.
Guess if we knew that, we might have bluffed it. Who knows? Maybe if he called flop, he would have called river.
Yeah, maybe. So that would have made us look super terrible if he wrote us off there on that board with King High. So
Yeah.
I assume that if he
So
makes it 3x here, then we're
that's really
getting it.
convenient when he makes it 3x. If he min raises, what do you think? Would you overbet shove, flat, 3-bet call?
I guess still shove, but I'm super happy when he makes it 3x because it's so
Yeah,
much more profitable than as if he min raises. So kind of a jackpot situation. So that's
definitely.
really good.
Yeah,
If he min raise, I still think it's a shove because with pocket sixes, they play so bad post flop that I don't really like any other option too much. I think 3-bet calling is not as great as shoving against a random basically. So I like this more.
definitely. And if he 3x's here, is that would you have shoved over 3x?
No, I don't think so. I
Yeah, a
think
little
here
bit
we
too
can,
short.
yeah, I think here we can ISO pretty easily though, and then
And that's
hopefully that's a good
probably our
card.
best hand.
I guess so. It's a big bet, but still
Nice.
think that there's really nothing we can do once we get there like this.
Very nice. Yeah, this seems like a pretty soft 15. I guess, I mean, like we were saying, a lot of it just comes down to when you're registering and, just some element of chance there.
Yes, this is a lot softer than the one before with the supernova. So um, definitely happy with this. I'm actually I don't really know when the best hours are to rake those. I'm not really sure, but I think you can also get a lot of info on this through reading forums and asking friends or asking other regulars, or even if you can also check Shark Scope for this and see when good regs are playing or whatever. So
Yeah, definitely.
there's a
Well,
lot of
Shark
info.
Scope is,
Yeah.
is kind of tough for spins because such a small percentage of them get recorded. But some of
Oh, I
them do
didn't
get
know.
recorded, and you're right. There's probably a lot of discussion on that online.
Yeah. I read. I think that the I usually read the 2+2 heads up forum, and they merge the heads up sit and go and the spin forum. And I think like don't quote me on that, but I think like 70 to 80% of content on there is like spin stuff at the moment. So I think you can get a lot of info on there for free.
Right. Um, Hopefully he'll shove here. Queen 4 pretty close. I guess that's. I think that's probably the bottom of our range for like 9 blinds in the small blind, right? The Queen 4 offsuit.
Yes, I was thinking that he will usually just fold too much, basically, which is why I decided to shove. That's what made it there.
Yeah,
Um,
and given his stats, well, now this is a few hands later. Might have been slightly different earlier. He might also be one of the few guys that we can min raise fold and just take advantage of the blocker even in 9 blinds.
yeah, that's true.
And I mean that would have been kind of nasty with the queen jack suited too. I mean normally for 16 blinds we would have a pretty clear call, but he hasn't 3-bet once. I think maybe against him that would have been a raise fold for 16 blinds.
Yeah, I agree with this. He doesn't seem to want to 3-bet like ever, so I'm kind of tempted to, but I think that's just too wide of having min raise fold range there with 3-8 offsuit. I
I don't
think
know. I,
here.
I think we could profitably min raise any 2 cards into him. That kind of category, that kind of guy who's playing like 26-9, particularly 3-handed, to me is really one of the weakest opponent types. Like I don't know if I were you, I'd be kind of glad the small blind shoved, because if he hadn't shoved, I would have felt like I had to shove it. but I wouldn't have wanted to. Of
Yeah,
course,
that
now
was my thought process too.
then he snap folds, so I guess I'm completely wrong about that. But that's what I would have thought at the time, at least.
The big blind kind of has a too large 3-bet percentage, so I don't like to raise that wide there.
Maybe now he's waking up a little bit, been a little more active these hands.
That's also interesting that he still keeps min raising there with a smallish stack from the button. So that indicates, I guess, a stronger hand than as if he just shoved. However, once he checks back this flop, that completely takes out overpairs from his range. So I don't know.
It's a question, why not shove the 5-5? That was, of course, the hand we were just talking about. I mean, pretty much to me, the reasons are that even ignoring who the button is, when you face a min raise and a 10 blind shove and you have fives in the big blind, I mean, that's never really going to be a snap shove. And when you add in the fact that the button had been playing so passively, I think we pretty definitely have to fold there.
Yeah, I completely agree. There's really nothing we are crushing ever, and there's nothing we can do really.
But back above starting at least.
I think
Wow.
here we could try this out because we haven't been raising that many buttons. However, we get punished instantly.
This is for his 3-bet. He can celebrate.
Yeah, that doesn't really stop us from min raising. Because he 3-bet once, that doesn't mean that he will make the correct adjustments to our raising percentage there. So it's still profitable to min raise quite a bit against him.
Yeah. And it's also fine to be wrong. I mean, some of the time, a guy is just going to kind of card dead for a bit. And so if you find yourself making exploitive adjustments that turn out to be incorrect, that's just fine. That's just what happens some of the time. In spins, it's pretty uncommon that you've got a lot of hands to go on until, I guess, probably like 60s is the first time you're likely to have a significant sample against players.
Yes, I agree. I mean, I do have good samples on a couple guys at 15s too, but that's also because I used to play a lot of heads-up sit and goes, and a lot of guys from heads-up sit and goes transitioned to 15s and 30s. So I think that's why I have a lot of hands on them. But to make like really good guesses on the ranges, I think my samples are still too small, even though I played a lot.
Yeah, and it was
So
a
then-
good shove there with the king 8. Pretty sure effective stack with one of the players under 10 blinds with the other, definitely the correct shove. So
Ooh, big blind over.
way all in. 6.
Best hand wins, so
Okay. So
that's that.
I think yeah, no more questions are being typed in. So any last words of wisdom, David?
Well, as I said before, once we talked about spins, I think it's a great format. I think rakes definitely something to think about once you play them. But as we saw here again, even at like stakes where you can actually make a bit of money, 7s and 15s, people still are not able to make the correct adjustments, and there are a lot of recreational players. So I still think it's a great format to play, and a lot, maybe even like there was someone in the chat box who asked how much ROI there's to be had in the 6-max hypers, for example. I think that spins, like which are essentially 3-max hyper turbo sit and goes, I think are most likely more profitable at similar stakes than, for example, 6-max hyper turbo sit and goes. So I think hopefully I could show you guys a couple things, and would be great if you were happy to play some spins for yourselves too.
All right, awesome. And great job as always. Awesome to get your thought process. I think possibly you have room for another student or two. So if anyone particularly wants to improve their spin game and get some coaching with David, feel free to contact me or him about it. And awesome job. Thanks also to everyone who tuned in today. It was great to see you guys. A lot of regulars, some new faces. Shifty, you're very welcome. Nathan Renard, awesome to get you and the Brazilian contingent on here. Great to see you. Tachi Nerdu, you are very welcome. Um, Plans for next week coaching, I'm not sure yet, but it will not be spins, probably 9-man or 180-man, so I will let you guys know about that. Tony P. Mem, was great to see you back on here. Scott O'Neill from the USA, nice to see you. Good luck on Bovada. Carlson, you're very welcome. Red Heater, thanks. Very much appreciate that. So have a great week, guys. See you next week.